So a lot of photography is decision making, and one of the key kit decision making choices that almost all of us have to make is which lens we're going to use. Normally we only have the option of one camera or one kind of camera. It's like we have full frame cameras, we've got a full frame camera. We're not going to pick which camera we want specifically. Some of us have the luxury of having medium format cameras as well, so we can make that decision, but that's another video in itself. For this one here, we're talking about lenses, and not the specific lens, but the focal length. So when I have the scene in front of me, how do I know which lens I want to use? Do I want a 20mm lens? Do I want a 200mm lens? What is the thought process going through my head as a commercial photographer as to what I'm going to use? Now, I actually own a lot of lenses, but predominantly I use two. One is the 50mm Secor and one is the 90mm Secor. And they are lenses like this. They're a bit weird and niche. They're from like the 1990s. They're incredibly sharp, incredibly detailed, incredibly heavy, and they're fully manual in terms of like even the aperture blades are manual selections. And this is very useful because on certain lenses, aperture is very much a suggestion from the camera. If it's an electronical aperture blade, which most modern lenses are, the aperture closes and opens with each frame, and if you take 100 frames at f16, you'll notice that every exposure is ever so slightly different, which is a nightmare for stop motion and also a nightmare for composite work where you need them all to be exactly the same. So for me personally, with my two lenses, my 50 and my 90, it's all about compression and how much of the background I want to see. If I want to see a lot of the background, we will go for a wider lens and come closer in. Now, having any lens closer to a subject, regardless of the focal length, makes it distort. A 200mm lens, if you could get it close enough, would distort. So having a 50mm lens very close to the subject will both distort the subject, because on my particular one I can focus pretty much as close as the glass, just because of the bellow system that I use, and the background will be huge. It'll be right out there. Now, it doesn't affect the depth of field choosing the lens, but what it does affect is how out of focus the out of focus areas are because of the compression. And this is a bit of a long story, but if you shoot a 200mm lens and focus on the eyes and fill the frame with somebody's head, where it falls out of focus will start at the same point as if you used a 10mm lens, filled the frame with the face and did the same thing. The difference is the rendering of the background, not how much is in focus. So if you wanted a really compressed background where you couldn't see anything, choosing a longer lens might be useful. Now for me personally, I like everything in focus from front to back, so that's not something which goes into my decision-making process. But the distortion and the perspective of the background really is. So when I was shooting my scenes of the little people in the forests, they were using my 50mm lens. And that was because I wanted to get, one, the distortion to make it look a little bit out of this world, because nothing really adds up. The lighting doesn't add up, the situation doesn't add up, the scene doesn't add up, nothing adds up. It's not supposed to be a realistic image. And that was part of my choice for that lens. The other benefit to that was it really opened up the scene and allowed me to throw in a huge sky composite to give it a bit more of a otherworldly look. Now conversely, if I wanted to shoot something and make that item really the hero and just compress that background down so it wasn't so much going on behind it, I choose my 90mm lens. And if anything, I'd say that I choose that lens more often than not. The 50mm is rarely used, but I have it there because it is my alternative. Now, of course, you can get longer and also wider lenses, but I don't particularly feel that I have much of a use for those. It's rare that I want to have, like this here, this is an 18mm lens, and it's really wide on like a crop sensor video camera. This is very wide and distorted. It doesn't really lend itself to my sort of work. I'm more likely to want a 50 or a 40, somewhere in that sort of ballpark. So that's why I don't have those wide lenses. And likewise with the super telephoto lenses. I like my backgrounds to be clearly visible. I like people to see what's there, and having that level of compression and the way it draws the out of focus areas on like a 200mm lens, that just doesn't really do it for me. So that's my decision making process. I hope that's been of use to you. I'd love to know what yours is. Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.